In this video I'm going to look at Unity and the way we can create a look for our work. So this is kind of, some of it will be looking at post-processing and also some of the lighting using HDR images. So I've got an open fresh project here. I've downloaded a couple of things already, Unity HDRI, standard assets, and I've imported some of my materials that I'm going to be using for this. Now the HDRI images that I'm using for this are the Unity HDRI pack, so you can download that from the asset store for free. Takes a few minutes, so I've downloaded and imported that already. And also, if you are you can find the standard assets in here as well, which I'm just using this for the first person controller to move around the scene. The materials, I've just got a collection of different looks, so I can build a scene in here. They have there were 2K materials, and it doesn't matter which ones you're using, but it just helps for the look. So I've got the scene in the game. I'm going to bring the game window down here, just so I've got a bit more space to view that. I'm going to put it in this area here, so I can have a look at that. And also my other preference is to have a one column layout, so I can work with those. The first thing I'm going to do is look at Skyboxes. So you can see the box here has a small sun. This is a Skybox, and this shows up from the camera view. The camera's looking at that area there. The things we can do with this are we can create a new Skybox by creating a material and selecting from this Skybox. Now you've got a few different options here. Panoramic, if you've got panoramic image, or cube map, which maps it onto 6 sides of a square, or the size of a square, and also a 6-sided one. For this, I'm just going to start by demonstrating the procedural texture. So this default one that we have here is a procedural texture as well. In this one, we have a preview of where that is. So we've got a kind of a different tints in there. Got the atmosphere tint, the sun strength, HDR exposure. So you've got a few different settings you can change. If you want to change some of the colors, you'll just get different lighting in there. So we really have to attach this to the scene before we start working with that and seeing how that's going to show up. We can look at the main camera. We've got this showing that it's using the Skybox in there. But to actually set this up, we need to get the lighting window up. So we go to the window, rendering lighting settings, and this will give us a new tab that we can just dock in here. So we've got the default Skybox now, but I have created a second one, and because I've got the HDR images in as well, we probably have more. So the default Skybox just comes up as that option there. The new material, which is the one that I just created, new material, that one will be, let me just put in new material, here it is, and so that now shows up in my scene. So that allows me to see that and the effects it's having on different aspects when I'm working with that. So I'll just close that down and reselect the material so I can see the parameters I'm working with on there. So we've got procedural. We could also change this to panoramic, where we would connect that to an image. So you've got the spherical HDR there, and the mapping and the different aspects. The other ones are for cubes. I won't use that. I just want to look at the atmosphere tint. So this is going to be slightly different in 2019. That's why I'm hesitating there, there is a few different options on this, one of which is the height of the atmosphere. But you can change the colours, and you can see how that's kind of got very dramatic change in colours, and that's just tinting the blue. So you've got this kind of grey or black shade there that you have very bright, very dark. It's kind of a nice angle to go on, but if you are looking at very different skies, you can actually change that hue considerably. So finding the right look, the right colour, is all done from there. We've also got the ground, so this grey area here, you can change that colour. We could work with that in other ways. So these won't really show up on when you've got items in the set. So I can just make that into a neutral colour there as well. And if I look around, I should be able to see the colour of the sun. So you can see there's got that yellow tint around it, and that's controlled by this colour here. So you can see I've got a different hue on different aspects. So that's using different methods there, but we've also got in the HDRI pack a few different HDRIs as well. So I don't know if I can move around there. So this is a 360 image, but we've got the light coming from this area here. It's a really nice one. So we should be able to drop that into our Skybox material, and then that shows up as an actual scene. So we've got this kind of scene in the background for what we're doing, and I'm going to pick on something which is a little more generic. This woodland scene here, quite like this one. It's obviously got the park benches in there and those sorts of things, but as I look around, we have a lot of trees and those aspects. So as long as I'm hiding those benches, I don't really want to work in a scene with those benches, but I do like the trees in the background. So I think when I start building a grid in here, or building a floor plane, that will go. But this allows me to kind of work with these different lights in these different ways. The other thing we can do is add this, which is the sunlight from the scene. So we say the sun source, and at the moment it's this directional light here. Now the thing to do is to find out where the light is coming from in the scene, and to try and match that with the light. So at the moment we've got the light up here, that's where the sunlight's coming in, but the directional light actually is going in a different way. So I'm going to just turn that so it's in what seems like the right direction for that sun there. It's slightly off, so I'll just bring that around again. You don't have to be super accurate with that, but it just if it's pointing completely the wrong way, then it's not going to look realistic at all. So I haven't got anything in the scene yet, any objects, so it's not actually going to cast any light. So to bring some objects into here, I've got the textures. I'm going to mock up a scene, not use a highly detailed scene, but I am going to use some specific packages that aren't always imported into Unity. So we have a certain amount of packages in Unity that we can import as we want to, otherwise the software would get very, very large. So I'm going to start with Probuilder. I'm going to select that and install that. This comes with Unity now, so this means I can make some models within Unity. And I'm also going to install Postprocessing as well. So it might need to finish the Probuilder first, and then I'm also going to look at some beta software, or software that isn't fully released yet. So the Probuilder one has a similar one called Progrids. That's my install button. So Progrids will allow me to snap objects to grids that I build in Probuilder, and I find that really useful when I'm designing. So I'm going to bring that one in as well, but it's not on the main list because for some reason it's not fully released. So if I want to look at other packages, preview packages can be turned on. They're not stable and unsupported for production. So this is a Progrids, there it is. I just find this really useful, and it was released on the asset store previously, and I used it a lot, and it just helps when you're lining objects up. So once I've done with packages, I can close down that window. So to start building, I'm going to open Probuilder window, and this gives me the main options for Probuilder here. I'm going to start and pretty much only use this new shape tool. This comes up with a window here. I'm going to dock this one as well so I don't lose it. To start off by putting a cube at the origin. So this I'm going to make a 10-meter cube with a height of 4 meters and a depth of 0.5. When I press enter, it disappears. It's actually built that for me. So the difference is if I'm in a design mode, I have a blue geometry. So I can bring it forward, and I can move that around in there. So it may feel like I've set that up, but because the actual object still has this blue color, I still have to press build on here before that actually has been made. So if I press that again directly, then I have another door appear there. So now I can bring that along and have a double door. So I have this turned on as well. If you've just loaded up Progrids, that might not be on. So if I have that off, it has a free flowing movement. But when that's on, it will jump to the actual units that you might be working to. Sometimes you want to reduce that fraction. So if I had in there a snap value of 0.5, then I would get another level of snap. So the grid has actually shrunk now, so I've got that kind of smaller aspect in between. And with these objects you can copy paste as you would normally. So it's a Control C and a Control V, and then have that object lining up. So that's built a wall. It looks a bit odd having this floor in there, so after I've saved the scene, let's call this Pro Builder, and I'm going to create a ground plane for this. So I'm going to create a large ground plane. Now you don't have to do this in Pro Builder because Unity does have its own planes. I'll give it 1000 by 1000. That should be reasonable for a fairly close one. And then from the inspector, I will set the position because it's 1000. I'm going to do half of that, so the center of the object is in the center of the scene there. And that just expands out to show the whole scene in here. Now I think my HDR image is very bright, and I don't think that's all coming from this directional light. So I'm just going to check my lighting there. If I take that, click on that and take it to the top, I can set that to none. And you see it darkens slightly. So there's a lot of light coming off the skybox there. So I'm going to undo that. Environmental lighting intensity I can reduce. I You see that's kind of coming down, so I'm getting a lot of light from that. It's not causing that shadow, but if I bring that down I can actually see some of the detail in the scene. So I'm bringing that right down, so it's still bright, but then I'll be able to see the textures that are on there. So everything I've done, I've actually rebooted this software. The Skybox sunlight, I did this a minute ago, but the computer crashed, so I'm not sure if it's in the same video. The sun's coming from there. I'm going to make sure that the actual directional light in the scene is going in the same direction. I'm just going to bring that round in that way, and that should be able to match that sunlight slightly. So that is causing that shadow there. It's possibly a little bit off, so I can have that. I can see down here the shadows are working a lot better than they were, so I just have that coming out from where it is very bright behind. I can also say the sun source can be that light as well, and that may just add to the look. So I've kind of got those lighting levels worked out slightly. I will come back to that and explore that more. But for now, I'm working with these cues to bring up a scene and just to bring out a scene. So looking at that from where the light is coming in, it's very bright. We see nice shadows behind. Let's keep saving, and so the next thing we want to do is really work with textures on this, and I can bring in some of the materials that I've been working with. So I've got some ground materials, and so what I'm really working to here is finding something that is contrasting. So I'll bring this colour and drop it onto that ground plane there, but I want to have a similarity to the HDR Skybox, but I want the different objects in the scene to have some contrast. So now I've got a kind of a grey greeny kind of well, it's mostly grey look. I can then have these walls in something contrasting so they show up. That's just the design I'm going for, but actually generally it's good to have a good contrast in your work. So if I check this texture here, click on the ground plane again, because it's a Probuilder standard vertex color, so it's not very complex. So I generally will change that to the standard, and that allows me to add in my normal map and ambient occlusion. The normal map is the most used, or the most useful, because it does add a lot of to the texture, and it needs fixing. It needs to be told that that is a normal map. So I don't really set that up beforehand, but it is something that has an impact. I think those are the ones I want to work with on this. So you can see I'm getting an actual look down here in the game. So as I do less designing and more look development, I will swap these around in terms of their style. I can also bring together, I'm just going to use some fairly standard bricks. So again, what I was saying was using a contrasting colour. I'm going to bring those with quite a light brick colour. I think that's too bright. I think within those bricks there's not quite enough contrast between the actual brick and the mortar, but that actually shows up pretty well from the scene. I'm also going to move this camera so the main camera here, I actually want it to show the main lit face. So it's behind the light at the moment. And that's mostly dictated by the Skybox I was working with. I can rotate that 180 degrees. So that's showing up pretty well. I will come back to that, and I can improve on that texture again by making that a standard texture and picking out the normal map for that, and I'll give that some more depth. I'll bring in my occlusion map as well. But that's done something a little bit weird. No, my occlusion, actually that's distorted. So I'm going to undo that one. And I'll have to live without that one on this particular scene, or that with those particular bricks. But close up that looks fine. So then within that folder, it's actually made a material. So this is the actual material I'm working with. So I don't want to create a new one each time. I can take that material and just drop it onto the other elements in there, and that will match up what we're working with. So this very quickly brings a scene together for me. There's a lot more you can do with this, and you probably will, but just to kind of put a few finishing touches onto what I'm trying to create here, I'm going to just change a few parameters on this and put a roof on top of the building that I'm working on. So I'll bring that up, and it can overlap, but that's on the ground there. So this probably in its width is going to be about 28. So I'll just reset that to be 28, and I'll give it a nice depth of 18. So it's quite a large top for that, just so I can get that different levels. That should slide back. Again, I can see that I've got those numbers wrong. 36, my numbers aren't. Number pad isn't quite working. Number 36. 36. Okay. I can go with that as an overhang. So it allows me to see what's going on in there. Having an overhang is okay, because that can be an outdoor roof, or I could fill that with glass as well. So make sure I build that one so that's solidified, and this time I will add a roof material. We've got roof tiles, and then we'll move on to the next stage, which is really looking at the post-processing. How do we go forward? So bring that back to standard and drop on the normal map. Okay, so I've got a reasonably good face here for that. I'm also going to just finally add a few objects in the scene at different places. Stairs are quite fun. They're not always relevant to your work, but and these are very specific, very gamey. Bring that down to ground level there. I can also just check how high the building is. I want this to be able to go to the top of the building, so that's height 4. So I've obviously dropped that down slightly. I can do more steps because I want it to be possible for the first person controller to walk up it, so I can make that quite shallow, and then finally just bring that back up a level, and that'll start to work. So you can then have a staircase that would lead you up to the top floor of this building, and if I'm lucky that would just fit in between that entrance there. Oh, not particularly lucky, but if I planned it right, like I did, you've got a step going all the way up there. Just close that gap that leads up to the roof. So again, I'm going to build that. That's probably a little bit deep. I'll probably make that a bit shallower. Let's bring that in there. Build. Okay, so the reason I specifically wanted a staircase in there is so that I can start using things like depth of field. So once I've saved this, I can close that window, and then from within the scene, I haven't labeled any of these very well, so I'm just going to create a game object that I can add these to, so that my scene's fairly neat. So I'm just going to call that set. So it's got the ground plane and mostly cubes and a door. One thing I have to do is assign a layer to these objects. So they're all on default at the moment. If I click on the group they're in, I can add a layer for that, or I can use the post-processing layer. So if I put that onto the post-processing layer, it says, do I want all the children to be set to post-processing as well? I can say yes, because currently they were default, and now they're all layered as post-processing. Now this is important because when we start working with the post-processing system, we create a volume here, post-process volume, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this global so it affects everything in the scene, and I'm going to give it a profile. So once I've created the profile, I can start adding effects. So it's got a drop down list here. I'll start with color grading. Color grading allows me to affect different colors within the scene, or the kind of the look, and it comes from video production. So I also need to make sure that this post-processing volume is in the post-processing layer, otherwise that won't show up. But you can see from this that I can now tint or work with these in quite cinematic ways. So bring the saturation down to grey, or have a small amount of colour, or oversaturate it. So this is all effects that are happening after the rendering's done. So it's taking that final image here and working with that. Probably won't work with the green. Probably would do a hue shift to allow me to just push that into a slightly more surreal way, and I'd like to have extra contrast as well. Doesn't always work, but that kind of just, in this case I'll go for quite an extreme look. The more saturation you have, the less hue shift you want. Just have a tiny bit on that. Kind of make it slightly more green. So you can see how that's coming together already. There's a lot more you can do. This is a very powerful system, and it's worth looking at color grading. The other ones that you probably want to look at as well are depth of field, for example. And in this, you can, if I just bring these all down to very low levels, I thought that might show up by now. Here we go. You can see how that is blurring that, but we want to be able to pinpoint a certain area. You can bring that quite low. So a low aperture will allow for more depth of field effects. So now that's on a 2 meter focal distance. I'm starting to see that kind of blurring on one end, and we can shift that to different positions as well. So I'll just make that larger and shift that to 1, 2. I've got this bit in focus, so you can see why I wanted to have something with a bit of depth in now. So 3 is the main area there, but 2 is where I want this, and it's a matter of just kind of really working with this until you get the look you want. So on this, this is very close. This bit's in focus here, and as you move the camera around, you'll find that that focus will shift with it. So that kind of comes into focus there, pull back, out of focus. So I'm feeling like that was a bit extreme, but I was kind of demonstrating the point on that. So if I reduce that slightly, you can see that kind of fade just drop back. I get to the walls just about in focus. That's given me the detail on here, but actually the background blurring out quite a lot. I can see the blur right here. So the next stage for me is to drop in a first person controller. As from the standard assets as we used earlier. Now the thing to note here, I have got the override, so that camera is overriding the main camera that was in the scene. I'm going to turn that around 180 degrees, press enter, and then I'm going to move this back so that I've got that in front of me, the scene's in front of me. I'll just bring that up so it's actually on the ground level. Thing to remember is this is made up of a capsule and a camera. So because we set up the camera before with the post-processing layer, I need to do that with this as well. So I'm going to click on the first person character and add component post-process layer, and tell it which one to work with, post-processing layer. And you may need to click on this part here, this, so that it knows which object is going. But now you can see that's jumped into a blur already, so I've got this depth of field working on that as well. And it's better illustrated again by actually having a walkabout. You can see the difference in the focus, so I can see that wall very clearly, but as I go through I can see the end of that is slightly blurred, and as I walk away from that wall, at that point it starts blurring considerably. It's got a really nice effect, but you do have to set it up for each camera you're working with using the post-process layer script. So there's a lot in there, but this is a way of getting you started with a look development. So I think the color grading, and sometimes but not always the depth of field, is a good place to start to develop your look.